of us, of course, but for me, these issues are just absolutely life and death. They're not issues, right? I see what happens to my children downtown and how different it is from Washington kids. And so, it's very hard to, I'm going to start crying in a minute. So when I talk about these issues, I'm referencing all the children I've lost, right? And the question that we're going to ask me to talk about this very briefly, and I will answer it, is, what do you hear the people saying in the community that they want? And for the adults, I hear, they don't tell you to fill it out, but they'll want control, they want safety, they want people to listen, they want bridges to other places and resources, and they want flexibility in their lives. With the children, they tell you things in a different way. And one of the little girls at a drawing one time, when we asked her what she wanted, she drew a picture of kids just jumping rope and playing hopscotch and not getting shot. And another little girl came up to me one time and just innocently asked if I eat every day. So that puts an edge on this stuff for me, that we better get serious about this.
So now we're on that dividing line. Oh, everything's pretty much between 1890 and 1920. Everything here. Those are the peak years for most of these neighborhoods. Up right after the little church, we'll make a left on 23rd Street and we'll find a place to park right there. Come on in as close as you can, and kind of hopefully everybody can see where we are as well. This is St. Leo's, right? It's one of those, you're going to see some very prophetic images, I think, today. But I look at it staggers me. The inscription: "Behold the tabernacle of God with men," and bam. Right? Here we are in what was once the fourth largest city in the United States. At one time, they were actually thinking about making it the capital of the United States. And this is what a couple generations of government programs, institutional flight, white flight, and bias have done to this city and others like it. And we did this. We did this. This was me lying in bed. I had cancer, and I'm not even supposed to be alive. I had malignant melanoma in my lymph system. So I was doing this combination of sort of recording what was going on in my life through writing and drawing. Because of the surgery, I lost the use of my arms. And they hung. I could use my fingers, but I couldn't use my arms. So I started doing these little tiny drawings, like with a big pen, just a stipple, like stipple drawings, right? So I was working on those, and I had reached my 10-year mark with the cancer, and looked like I was going to survive. And at that point, my closest friend, who'd really kind of helped me through the cancer years, committed suicide. And I quit drawing. I quit doing anything for about a year, and as the 1-year anniversary of his suicide, he walked into the river at night, came around, I started doing these drawings, obsessively. Again, you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of kids will ask, like, well, why did people build their homes next to the highway? Right? Not realizing, of course, that the highway came in where the houses were. Right? Or they'll ask, when are they going to build here? Well, this was the heart of the city. It was built up. This is all that's left of St. Leo's, which was an enormous church that covered pretty much this block. And buildings everywhere. You look at old maps and drawings, this was just densely built up everywhere you look, right? And then you look now, where are the schools closing? Where are the homicide rates the greatest? And it's all, it's right there before our eyes, right? We just don't necessarily put it together, right? They think of being affected by racism as being a negative thing, but in many cases we benefited. My grandfather did, my father did. You think about all these restrictive covenants and how they affected, say, black people's ability to just own property. And now, certainly it's true for me, I think it's true for most people, the main source of inherited wealth is a home. Open your eyes and pay attention where we are right now. If the person next to you is nodding off, poke them, because this is very, very important here. And if you're both nodding off, I'm going to poke both of you. There's something else I want to put in your head right now, though. One of the other themes in this pattern 5 is disappearing black communities. And this is not disappearing black communities because we fulfilled the dream of the civil rights era. This is being forcibly erased and torn to pieces. To put ideas to this for you is, I can see I call them patterns, right? And that's very important. History doesn't repeat, but it does have patterns. And so I tried to isolate some themes for you, so that you can understand. One of the patterns is the way St. Louis relates to Missouri. One's the past and the present. So when I say Mill Creek Valley, I'm referring to a specific area of St. Louis. What I want you to do, though, on this tour, and we're going to start right now, is I want you to understand that every single inch of this, where we're going, is part of the tour. So I'd like you to spend your time looking and thinking. The last thing I want you to do, the absolute last thing I want you to do, is sit and just chat about stuff until we stop the bus, all right? I want you to really think about this information and where we are. And forget about dorm food, forget about boyfriends and girlfriends, forget about your phones, all right? Forget about all that stuff. For 3 hours, we're gonna think about other people's lives. That's Grand, and that was the western edge of Mill Creek Valley. And when you look down here, pretty much the highest buildings you see, that was even in Mill Creek Valley. It started around Union Station, and there was another little area called Chestnut Valley, just to kind of span the distance between Mill Creek and the river. So almost everything you see, except that distant horizon, was part of Mill Creek Valley. But a lot of the folks then settled in Mill Creek Valley and then a little later in the Ville. And we'll talk about that more as this sort of tour unfolds. And there's reasons that we'll also talk about as the tour unfolds about why those two areas and not the rest of the city. So that's sort of an introduction. You do know Great Migration, right? When I say that, you know what I mean. I ask because a couple of years ago, I was talking to some students, college students, right? And I was talking about stuff, and I said, oh, then the Great Migration, and went on, and then I looked back and went, you don't know what I just said, do you? Right? Great Migration. And I had to explain it, and I asked him, I said, you had history, right? I said, how could you possibly walk out your door anywhere in this country and understand what you're seeing if you don't know about the Great Migration? It's absolutely pervasive, right?
You should say something about it.
Should I? It was during it was kind of post-Civil War, a reaction to Reconstruction, a reaction later on to Jim Crow laws, a reaction to even agriculture changing, mechanizing. There was a boll weevil infestation that killed the cotton crop. There were so many reasons. People just afraid of being lynched, right? And people start coming up from the south to the northern cities. It went on for several generations, several decades. In fact, in the latest in the 1940s, St. Louis was still called Negro Heaven down south. Even with all the problems we had, it was still seen as better than down in the south. But what you also then will hear as the tour goes on is what actually greeted these folks when they came up from the south during the Great Migration. It wasn't exactly what they were hoping for. There's a bond issue in 1955 to actually tear down Mill Creek Valley, and you can see what's left of it, nothing, right, except the highway. It came down between 1955 and 1959. That whole part of the city was wiped out. And some of you are asking about that segregation ordinance, or where he is right now. Oh, there you are. As black folks came up from the south, white folks started coming up with amazing, very detailed machinations to keep them in just a few parts of the city. There were two main areas where they were actually able to live in rather great numbers. One was Mill Creek Valley, and the other was the Ville. So some people look at Mill Creek Valley and said it was a slum. Some people said that was a functioning, walkable community that had grown organically over generations. You can't just replicate that with buildings. Some people said that it was very racist to tear down Mill Creek Valley. Some people said it would be very racist not to tear it down, right? When they tore it down, the rats ran, right? One of the main groups that supported the demolition of Mill Creek Valley was the NAACP. Ernest Holloway wrote a letter saying we absolutely support tearing down Mill Creek Valley. The idea being that hopefully there would be better housing, right? So, again, history, like I keep saying, it's got a very complicated, fine grain, right? It doesn't always come out the way we want it to. But part of the story then is when you start tearing down neighborhoods, where do people go, right? And sometimes they're just scattered. A lot of folks from Mill Creek kind of went up north, began living with other friends and family, but there's another leg of this, and it was public housing. So let's go across the street. You need to see this over here. The distance between me and him had really, at that point, just almost obliterated. Again, sort of these kind of crazy, sick humor things that I was doing, almost as a defense against how horrible it was. I actually made a little altarpiece, like a shrine with all these toys on it. And of course, the altarpiece turned out to be like a mouse in a trap. And then again, that kind of gas mask thing came back. The drawings got cruder and cruder again. I found some old cartoons he'd done. When I finally read his journal, he talked about having taken a knife into the river with him in case he didn't have the courage to just go under. I was winning awards right and left, and it just freaked me out. Because frankly, I had never really intended to show this work because I thought it was too painful. So then I started taking my old drawings and just tearing them up. And so I would just tear them up in little pieces and made, boy, I'm really trying very hard. I mean, I'm pouring my life out here, so please stay awake, right? I started tearing my drawings apart, right, to make these new little things. And the funny thing was that they became kind of sweet, almost like the children's drawings. But over and over, as I did them, I kind of found myself back at the river. I didn't mean to, but there it was again. What was happening, this is right around the Civil War, what's happening is that the city, the downtown interests were raising all the money, right? And the county interests were spending it outside the city. It was a kind of an early suburbanization, right? Early suburbanization. It was called the county court. What was happening is that two of the judges were from the sort of outlying areas. One was from the sort of the city area. So every time there was money to be made, the city was making it. But every time there was money to be spent, either taxation or spending, the two sort of outstate judges always overruled the city judge. And so the city was raising all the money and the county was spending it all out there. So in 1876, the city said, we can't deal with this anymore, right? You're taking all of our money and sending it out into the county. This is right after the war, or Civil War. Eads Bridge is about to be built. St. Louis might be the capital of the United States. How can we fulfill our destiny if these clowns keep sending all our money out to the county? They're building roads so people leave the city. Right? We're paying our taxes so people can leave the city. And so the city in 1876 divorced from the county. And so now, and then the line is Skinker. The line is Skinker. So, and Baltimore did something similar, and they got the same problems that we do for the same reasons. So in most metropolitan areas, as you move out, your money still stays in a general pot, right? Non-St. Louis, the minute you go west of Skinker, your money leaves the city, goes to the county. When they did that, nobody could see the highway system coming. Nobody could see the New Deal coming. Nobody could see white flight on steroids, right? So you get a richer and whiter suburbs and poorer and blacker city. Because what's also happening with this fragmented county structure is that they're vying with each other for taxes, right? And income. So you've actually got, right where you've got Brentwood, Maplewood, and Richmond Heights, you have basically three sort of historic African-American neighborhoods that have all come down so that they can have competing shopping malls. Yeah. So this is going on right now. We don't even see it. We don't even know it, right? But it's all part of us as well. Right? So I'm going to show you something right over here. One of the only mechanisms we have to fix up some communities is historic tax credits. You can get them for historic buildings, you can get them for historic neighborhoods. Now, in some of these places, you don't have enough historic buildings to really make a dent, or you maybe even qualify. But they are historic neighborhoods. But the rub is you have to have a certain percentage of the original fabric left to qualify for a historic tax credit to fix up the rest. So if one too many buildings falls down, or a brick thief steals one too many buildings out from under you during the night, or you ask your alderman to tear down one too many buildings because it's unsafe, now you can't qualify to get a tax credit to fix up the rest of them. It's a hell of a knife's edge that, again, we have left these neighborhoods on. You know, we did it. It's us. We did it. You know? This is our history. This is our U.S. history. So I found that the best way to really help new people understand it is to talk about these patterns. And they are everything from historical ones like the relationship between St. Louis and Missouri, which is fascinating and vexed and has been since the days of the Missouri Compromise, to how to really understand and contextualize things that you're reading about in the paper now, whether it's what's happening in the schools or what's happening in the incarceration system or what's happening in Ferguson, what's happening at the NGA site. You'll be hearing about all these things as the tour unfolds. So it's how to contextualize the present, in a sense. You know, I've been teaching at WashU for a quarter century, right? And I've been teaching on the housing projects almost that exact amount of time, right? Adopted one of the kids down there, so I'm a white academic who's the father of a black former gang member, right? So I see a wide range, a wider range than a lot of people do. And one of the things that struck me, it's kind of a joke, is when I come to school, I see white people, right? When I go home, I see black people. And as we talk, I realize that there's two almost non-intersecting bodies of knowledge. That when I say Mill Creek Valley to white folks, it's like the first time they've heard of it, even if they grew up here, right? When I say Mill Creek Valley to black folks, they go, yeah, and Evans Howard Place and Kinloch and Meacham Park and Hadley Township, boom, right? The question becomes then, and that's why I call these tours understanding what we see. I mean, one of the things is, how do we even have a conversation about serious issues if we don't even know what other people know, right? Where is that common ground? And that's why I call this understanding what we see, because it's very easy to walk out our door and see things and even have what you consider to be an empathetic response, but that doesn't mean you know what you're seeing. It doesn't mean you really understand it, right? Something else I think is very important, and you know, in the best of all tours, we meet a lot of people. That doesn't always happen, but this really is ultimately about people and not issues, and especially, and I come at that from a very personal viewpoint. These are not sort of abstract issues about poverty and stuff for me, right? I bury children, not unlike you, on a regular basis because of the things we're going to talk about today. And things that other people think are either not real or it's those children's problem. I've often said if WashU students were dying out at the rate of my other students, this whole goddamn city'd do something, right? But other people's lives aren't the same, aren't worth as much as ours, apparently. The other thing that I think is most interesting and very tough about these tours is when I started doing all this, I realized I was contextualizing my own life. It was like, the more I learned, the more I would go, oh my God, that explains why I grew up where I did. That explains why my parents had the jobs they did. It explains why I know what I know and don't know what I don't know. Right? It explains why I know some people and not others. And you know, it'll happen to you as you grow up as well. Little by little, you'll realize where your life and your family's life fits into these larger patterns. And not this alley, but the next street. Left, and then left again at the end, and then we're gonna back to Cass, and we're gonna head back west on Cass. Okay? Yeah, so left here. That's what I'm doing in one part of my life. In the other part of my life, I'm still going crazy. That's a plate. I'd be looking at my plate while I was eating, and all I could see was the river. And one night, I actually was washing dishes, and the last thing in the water was a knife. And that was one of those nights when I almost did it. In fact, I was just standing there wishing I could do it, and somebody knocked at the door. And I opened the door. It was a total stranger. They were lost, right? And they just knocked at my door looking for somebody else, and I just fell into their arms crying. I think they saved my life. It was one of those moments. But I was having these nightmares. And so I finally said, there is no short way around this. I'm simply going to have to go back to the river and try to confront this. But what happened is that over and over, even without intending it, these drawings came out looking like I was back at the river at night again. It's like, my God, it's still, and it's like, I can't go back there. I can't go back there. So I just basically said farewell to that. By now, my drawings were selling like crazy, getting great reviews. I was voted best local artist in St. Louis, had my gallery, and I quit drawing. Again, a lot of people are very curious and focused on Ferguson. We may or may not have time to get to Ferguson today, but the idea is that even without going there, this begins to explain it. Right? A lot of people think of Ferguson as like, where did it come from? They think of it only as police issues. But what you do have in Ferguson is the same injustice you see in other areas, but you also have a critical mass of people. There's so few people left in some of the city, there's not enough people to even have an uprising. Right? So it's this interesting sort of calculus between people and issues. One of the things that's really upset me about academia, frankly, they suddenly all want to be in Ferguson. I don't know where they've been all these other years with all these other things going on in other places, but now suddenly they want to be in Ferguson. They probably had to look it up on a map to get there, right? But now they talk like they're old friends. The whole idea, again, is that, Ferguson is a place, but it's also an idea. It's not about having your photograph taken within the city limits of Ferguson. Right? That's not it at all. It's not the photo op, right? It's much deeper and it's more serious than that. So I almost resist going to Ferguson in some ways, right? Because it's now too trendy. And I even, some of my friends that live in other municipalities around it say, it is ironic that our funding is now down about 20% because everybody wants to do something in Ferguson. They want Ferguson on their resumes, right? And academia is no different. So yes, we'll go, but again, you have to kind of think about what the motives are, right? There's a right and a wrong way to do things. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. Actually, one of them does involve Ferguson, and then I'll get to the food stories, John, so don't let me forget, and Ivy Perry. So one of the things I'm sure you all saw ad nauseum after the Darren Wilson was not indicted was the damage that was done around the city. And then after that, you saw all these folks coming in, oftentimes with cameras in tow and book deals in their, painting doves and flowers and positive slogans on the board-ups where the buildings had been damaged, right? And they got a lot of press and people thought that was wonderful. I hated it. I hated it. I thought it was like taking advantage of a situation to promote yourself, to do something that actually was a Band-Aid that disguised the seriousness of what was going on. My students did do board-ups, but they did them differently. And I'll tell you what they did. And they made a comparison to the other kind of board-up painting that got all the press. Because when my kids were doing this, they deliberately tried to get no press. The press came over and said, "We don't want to talk to you. We're not doing this for press," right? And the folks up there said, you had a very different model. You didn't come in after the damage to decorate it. You actually tried to save our businesses proactively. You really did something we needed, not something that made you feel good. How you are in the community. In a lot of, one of the things that academia has to struggle with is this reputation of being predatory in the community. And a lot of the folks in the community say, we are so sick of being a site. being interviewed and photographed and researched, and we never get anything in return. We're happy to open our doors, but we know, what do we get in return for all this? You know, we are not just a horizontal surface. You can't just go visit a site once and think, now I know everything I need to know, and all I have to do is go back and play on my computer.
You don't know what you're missing.
And then I said, okay, now what? Right? That's a very kind of a architectural way to look at things. What else did you learn? They said, oh, people, right? And so then they started putting pins on for people. So here's Miss Lovey, there's Bernice, there's Jeffrey, there's Susie, right? And then they thought they were done. And I said, you still aren't done, right? You still didn't get it, right? What else? And they go, oh, relationships.
And then
that was the only place.
movie theater.
And then the movie theater was.
So we had our own movie theater. Yeah, we had our own movie theater.
Tom McCann was right down the street. All of this.
Two hair salons.
Two
one
hair
on that corner.
You had a place where you can get pictures. You can go in and take a full 8x10
Yeah,
for
exactly.
$2.50. For $2.50 and $3 for a color.
Reunion in Western. My partner right here from Western. I'm from the north side. St. Louis represent. You did 4800.
Thank you, guys. And then I started working with the kids down in the projects. And I saw things going on in their lives that made the things in my life, I don't say pale, but the knife turned into a gun because of what I was seeing with the children down in the projects. And I did a woodcut of a gun. And then I started thinking about, you know, children and guns. And so that little rabbit showed up again, but now he's being just almost overwhelmed by a huge gun. Two guns sort of dancing, but, you know, pink and blue for a little boy and a little girl. Or another cartoon, you know, just holding the gun and loving and crying. And then I started printing those guns more than just once. I started just printing them and then drawing into them a little bit. And they almost turned into angels. And by now I was working with Guardian Angel downtown with the kids. And it was like, oh, I'm trying to turn these guns into angels.
That's it.
And these drawings then were all named for also for the children I was working with in the projects. So this is actually, this one's named for Javon.
I never knew my real father, never met him not once. Met Pops, and I can tell he really cared about each one of us, our lives as individually, you know. He had a certain relationship with all of us, so we all felt like he was our friend and we can talk to him. We never had none of that. Just because they lived down there, you were automatically a part of the Peabody blood gang. You were automatically a part of it, whether you liked it or not. Almost like you had no choice. A lot of us lost friends while we were just walking down the street with them, you know, drive by, somebody shoot them. Or you can be like, well, I'm gonna go in the house and get a cup of water, be right back. You might run up, grab 2 cups, and think you're trying to bring your friend one back, you hear a shot. You in the house, drop whatever you had, go outside, friend laying there bleeding to death, you know? It's just like that. I mean, just like that. To me, it's a miracle for anybody to have made it out from down there, you know, and actually make a change and do something else besides sell drugs and be in a gang. Those was the only options a lot of us had down there. And it's still like that to this day.
You know, I kind of alluded to some big ideas, but I'm going to get back to why we're right here in this particular place. And it's a very particular story. So given sort of all these things that have happened, and we'll fill in more pieces as we go, you've basically got, by the 1960s and 70s, a very poor black city in a very wealthy white suburb. Right? A lot of things come with poverty. Violence, crime comes with parts, part of it, right? There were so many shootings in this area during the Vietnam War that it was called Saigon, it was nicknamed Saigon Flats. The implication being there was as many shootings in here, this neighborhood, in any given day as in Vietnam. So it was a very, very tough area of town. The way I talk about this sometimes is some people say, well, you know, people love to say, oh God, slavery's over, Jim Crow's over, what's the problem anymore, right? And that's why it's very easy to people say, oh, well, Ferguson's just about police, right? I often think about it this way. It's almost like if I took you on the edge of a cliff, right, and pushed you over, and then suddenly said, well, I'm not pushing anymore, right? And you go, but I'm still falling, right? And that's the position our culture's in right now, right? We claim we're not discriminating anymore, we claim all this stuff, but the results of it are still dropping like dominoes, right? So in 2001, in March, there was a little boy named Rodney McAllister who was about 10 years old, and his mother lived right over there on the north side of the park on Cabanee. And he was out kind of playing in the park here kind of late at night. And again, as we said, there are areas that are so disinvested in now, and there's so few people to see or hear things happening that you can literally get packs of wild dogs and things just roaming through neighborhoods, and people can't do anything about it. So they were talking about these things. They were talking about the abandoned buildings at this meeting. And one of the things they talked about was wild dogs in the abandoned buildings. I think a lot of people were startled. I mean, sort of outsiders were there at the meeting to hear that this is a real concern. And it was a real concern in 2001 because when Rodney was playing, right, that night in the park, there was a pack of these feral wild dogs that just kind of roamed through the park looking for something to eat. And they found this little 10-year-old boy. And it was, you know, I'll let you finish the sentence, right? It was horrific. And it was one of those moments where the city woke up for a moment, or at least some people did. I think the question is, and we were even asking that with Mike Brown now, it's like, are we gonna stay awake this time, or are we gonna go back to sleep? You know? Because there's been times when we woke up and then went back to sleep. What they did in the wake of what happened to Rodney was everybody did what they're best at, is they start pointing fingers at each other. And because everybody wanted to blame somebody, but they certainly didn't want to see themselves as part of this picture, right? So people blamed his mother, and they blamed his teachers that they didn't spot. They blamed the school nurse. They blamed even his classmates, like why didn't they notice something or say something? They blamed the Humane Society. If you really want to understand how in 2001, within walking distance of one of the most prestigious universities in the country, and one of the streets that just got named one of the 10 great streets in the country, if you want to understand how in this day and age, in this place, a 10-year-old child can be eaten alive by wild dogs, you need to cast a net wide enough that you risk catching all of ourselves in it. And what she was talking about, what we're going to talk about some more on the tour, is generations and generations of what's happened to cities and the results on the people that are still living in them. That relates to this story because after what happened to Rodney, people did try to, they tried to not just blame each other, but some people tried to have positive responses. So one of the things that a group I was involved with did was we started putting on concerts. It was like, how do you bring people back? Because everybody was frightened. They didn't want to bring their kids here, right? And so we said, well, how do we make it safe? And we didn't want to make it safe just with the Humane Society, with guards and guns. So we said, well, let's just start having concerts and bring people back to the park that way. And it worked. It was like, the kind of joke was almost people armed with nothing more than their lawn chairs began to make the park safe for other people. Because people make it safe for people, right? And that's an old idea, in a sense, about safety. The safety is in other people. If other people are the solution. There's a whole other way of thinking people have developed that other people are the problem, right? And privacy is the answer. And you can, you can adopt that view, but But if you don't sort of see people, other people as part of the solution, then you damn well better have a lot of locks and alarm systems, because you've sort of gotten rid of the old safety net, which was other people. The other thing that happened in the wake of it was there's a memorial put up for Rodney. And we'll go over and see it in a minute and then just get on our way. But it's fascinating again to see how different people see the same thing. We all have our lenses, right? And one of the things I always try to talk to my students about is try to see things from as many points of view as possible, not just the one that you come at it with right now. Because there's a lot of people that see things exactly the opposite, and you need to understand why they do, right? And so that memorial, there's a plaque in there with a lot of names on it, and so some people look at that memorial and they go, this is a very good thing, right? That this was a horrible incident, but at least this memorial is here. This little boy will never be forgotten. Hopefully some good came from all of this. And that's the way they see it, right? And other people look at it and they look at the same thing and they think, oh my God, there's a lot of names on this plaque. You know, where were all these people when he was a living 10-year-old child and not a famous corpse, right? And so they'll look at the same thing and see it wildly differently, right? And there's probably an element of both, right? In most cases, there's an element of truth to opposites and everything in between. It's just how you weigh it all out. So let's run over and look at that, and then we'll get back on the bus, okay? I feel like, on one level, I feel like yesterday I was in your shoes. I mean, like, you know, it may sound stupid to you, but I feel like it's just like 20 minutes ago I was a student, you know, 20 years old, 18 years old. It goes like that. But I was involved in a lot of the kind of civil rights struggles. And actually, I got to meet Coretta King. I got to meet Julian Bond. But one of the things that I think always kind of startles students is I actually got beat up by the Ku Klux Klan during a lot of this time as well. Not voluntarily. I didn't volunteer to do it, but it happened. So it's funny because now it's almost like, God, my life is your history, you know? And it's really kind of a bizarre thing to have happen to somebody. It'll happen to you eventually, right? You'll have young people going, what was it like back then? And, you know, I read about that, and you were there for it, right? It'll happen. Just wait 20 minutes. Right? And this is actually good right here in this stretch. Just pull over and park anywhere. Right here is fine. Next little stretch up is fine anywhere along here. Drawing had served a function. And when I quit serving a function, I think I quit doing it. And I also discovered, working with the children, that there was more important things to do, to be done in this world, than do drawings for wealthy people to frame and hang on their walls. What I was learning about the children downtown is they were dying in a way that you guys will never experience. And so if I could use drawing to help them, fine, but I wasn't going to do it just for myself. So I quit drawing right at the peak, said I'm done. I've proven my point. I do not intend to spend the rest of my life entering shows as if that means a goddamn thing. What people will say is, you know, we've still got a colored school system. We just now hide it under the guise of school choice and all those kind of things, but it results in a colored school system. These schools in the city that are dealing with poverty, right? And it's hard to teach kids when they're in poverty. And so the private schools cream off the easiest ones, and the public schools are left trying to deal with the kids who live in the worst conditions. St. Louis still has a lot of money, but it's not on this side of the line. It's in the county. Right? There are areas in the county that are richer than the Beverly Hills. Right? But in the city, you can't hardly get a playground for children. Right? And my grandson is in the city schools. We've made a decision, right, to do that. But you know, the first day of classes, they ask all the children to bring in 12 boxes of Kleenex and 12 rolls of toilet paper to stock the school. We are not talking swimming pools and smart boards here. Right? This is the kind of inequity that a lot of us have grown up in and not even known it, and then also at some point made peace with. Right? And it really I rage about it because, you guys come here and one of the first things you're told is don't go north of Del Mar, right? That's where people are suffering, right? It's like, you're already down, we're gonna kick you some more, right? We're gonna act like you're not the victims, you're just somebody to be avoided, right? Honest to God, when I think about all of the relationships that have been established in these, what I think a lot of people consider unlikely neighborhoods, it's very gratifying. And it's gratifying for the students and the communities both. When some of these students over the years have graduated, the folks in the community, they'll get on their walkers, right, and come to graduation because that's the kind of deep relationship that has been developed. This isn't about, oh, well, let's talk to somebody to do a project and then forget they exist. These are probably lifelong relationships that are going to, I think, be very meaningful at both ends. Bottom line, relationships are what it's all about. And not, among disciplines, among neighborhoods, among people, it's relationships. And if you have them, you'll also learn things you won't learn any other way. Right? If you develop relationships, you'll probably then hear from people what they really need and want, right? And how we can help and work together. But you have to sort of listen and be out there to get this information, right? You develop relationships with places and people, and you develop them over time so that they last a long time, they go deep, they're broad. You don't just use people in the community for your project, right? And then when you're done, when you got your A, you put them back on the shelf and forget about them. They're real people. They're real people. Right? And so you don't sort of open up a relationship and then just drop it. So we would go into the communities. We've been up in Hamilton Heights for, good Lord, nearly 20 years probably now. And now and then a project would show up out of that, but it would show up out of the relationship. It's not like I've got this cool idea for the community, I'm gonna shove it down on you, right? It's I'm gonna talk to you, I'm gonna live with you, and then you'll tell me what you really need. You guys are way back there. We're gonna gather around the old manhole cover here for our next little talk. You can come right over here by me. So some of you have heard of Pruitt-Igoe. We are at it right now. We're smack in the middle of it. When I bring my own students here, it's part of a larger tour where we go to Kinloch, and we'll be there shortly. Then we go way out to West County to St. Charles, Newtown. And then we come back to Pruitt-Igoe after dark. And I have them bring their flashlights. Right? And we come through here, and at some point we get around here, and I just have them turn off their lights and just, right? And it becomes a kind of spiritual experience, especially once they understand the story. This is not a trek in the woods, right? many, many people's lives were affected by what happened here and are still being affected. I often bring, in my own course, we're getting a little tiny, just a sample of things that we do in the community building course. So we go to lots of different neighborhoods, spend lots more time there. This is just, we're kind of picking a few highlights to sort of give you a quick painting, right, of the St. Louis as a whole, spatially and over time. So let me put the pieces together for you again. So you've got, we kind of left our narrative off with people coming up in the Great Migration. The idea that the northern cities were going to be better than the South. And what they found instead very quickly was that the northern cities started closing their doors to the folks coming up from the Great Migration. The machinations in St. Louis were typical of a lot of cities, but again, everything that happened here went on steroids because of that 1876 divorce. It made everything worse. So in the early 1900s, the Great Migration is really just beginning. And you have to kind of, again, think, when people started coming up, they weren't thinking, I'm joining the Great Migration. It was only afterwards when people sort of realized there was a kind of movement here and people gave it a name, right? But one of the things that happened is you had these neighborhood associations being formed. And their express purpose was to write and enforce restrictive covenants. And these began in earnest around 1910 here in St. Louis. Restrictive covenants, for those of you that don't know, they were kind of attached to your deeds. So you would sign this paper that was put together by your neighborhood. It could be a block, it could be a couple blocks, right? But basically what this said is if you're going to move into this neighborhood, you have to agree not to sell or rent or let be occupied for a certain period of time, whatever demographic you were targeting. Right? Now, you can find restrictive covenants against Jews. Right? You can find restrictive covenants against women, often women with children. Especially apartments. Women in apartments were a real moral issue back in the day, right? You couldn't be a respectable woman if you were living in an apartment. So you can find restrictive covenants for some of these other things. And this relates to this larger issue, I think, now that what you're seeing in St. Louis is really the result of the black-white relationship. Everybody else fits into that somewhere. But what created this is the black-white relationship, right? So you can find these restrictive covenants against other groups, but history has proportions. We get so diversity happy, we want to all be equally discriminated against. It's not true. 99% of the restrictive covenants were against African Americans only. Well, they didn't call them African Americans. It was the Negro or Mongolian race, right? 99%. So this was one thing that they did, and actually an infamous one was the 1911 Marcus Avenue Restrictive Covenant, which really figures into American history in a moment. St. Louis was blanketed by these restrictive covenants. There were 378 neighborhoods covered by restrictive covenants. And it didn't have to be every single neighborhood, but if there was enough of them around, it sort of influenced what was between them. And that's why you only get a couple areas of the city where black folks could live in rather large numbers. Mill Creek Valley being one of them, and then later on the Ville on the north side. What's interesting is this wasn't just a Southern problem. In New York and New Jersey, in this period in the 40s, there were 67,000 GI Bill loans made. And fewer than 100 went to black folks.
How many?
Fewer than 100. It was just a handful.
But how many thousand?
67,000. In New York and New Jersey, this is not the South, right? So you hear all this stuff about, oh, you know, what the GI Bill did for veterans. It did for white veterans like my dad, right? So the sad irony is that these programs that were meant to level a playing field make it even worse. So at the same time now you're draining the white folks out of the city, you're blocking the black folks in the city, and now you got the highways, they're gonna help the white veterans leave the city, you're gonna tear down the black neighborhoods to do it. It's all going hand in glove, right? It's all going hand in glove. Initially, when folks were coming up from the South, especially white folks, they would go into what they call transitional housing. And you would then kind of get your feet in the ground and move out into the larger community. And that worked for a lot of groups, like the Irish and some of the Eastern European groups. When black folks came up and went into, quote, transitional housing, they suddenly found they couldn't get out because of all these other machinations going around the city. And this is when you start getting this intergenerational turnover in public housing. That led right into the next second phase of public housing, which is why we're right here, because the second phase of public housing was the high-rises. And instead of those being kind of low-rise transitional housing, that's where you put the people, that was the dumping ground for people whose neighborhoods you were tearing down. Right? And Pruitt-Igoe was one of those. You see the pictures in there, 33 11-story buildings. It was actually meant to be, it was two different projects. It was Pruitt and Igoe. The early people that first moved in here called it Pruitt and Igoe. They didn't call it Pruitt-Igoe. It was going to be 20 high-rises for black folks on the south side and 13 high-rises for whites on the north side. It was going to be two segregated projects. And so very quickly, it was fascinating, very quickly the white folks found somewhere else to live. The first year, there were about 25% white people there. The second year, about 5%. By the third year, they were gone. And Pruitt-Igoe became entirely black. What's also fascinating is to look at how they laid it out. Because Mill Creek is just over there. And you know, even if they're going to segregate it half and half, they've got at least 4 choices. You can put the blacks on the south, the whites on the north, the whites on the south, the blacks on the north, blacks east, west, west, east. They picked the one that kept black folks closest to where they already were. It was like they're in Mill Creek Valley, we'll bring them right over the hill, but then we're going to put this white buffer here. Right? Astonishing. Right? Nobody writes this stuff down, but they had 4 choices, and they picked one. Right? You cut the legs out from under something and then say, see, it didn't work. Right? And that's what they did with public housing. They reluctantly let it get built, but then they would nothing for maintenance. They said, you've got to keep it going on the income of the people that live there. They're already the poorest of the poor. Right? If you couldn't see that sentence, the way that one's going to end, you didn't want to see it. Right? And in 20 years, they started dynamiting the buildings. It didn't last 20 years. It was a horrific, horrific story. But it fits in with all the other stories. What I'm trying to do right here is to say, Mill Creek Valley and the highway system and white flight and the GI Bill and public housing, it's not 5 separate stories, right? It's one story. It's one story. By about 79, they were gone. And this was just level, just blank land again. And, but what it became, so when we're here, all of this stuff we're seeing, all this just in case you're getting all romantic and want to take a little piece of Pruitt-Igoe with you, this is not Pruitt-Igoe. All this rubble you're seeing. This is dumping. It was just a flat surface, and this became a wonderful sort of illegal dumping ground when they were tearing down other neighborhoods in St. Louis. All this topography is just illegal dumping, and then the birds and nature did all the rest. Yeah, the little church right here, you can see it in some of the old kind of iconic photographs of Pruitt-Igoe. Now it still survives long after Pruitt-Igoe as well. What's also interesting, again, is the crazy lines that we have in our cities. When I bring students here, a lot of times we'll stop there and they'll go, whoa, where are we? And why are we here? Isn't this intrusive? Isn't this, colonialism? Isn't this all this? And then Reverend David opened the door and said, hey, Brother Bob, come on in. We are so full of our own shit. Again, it's like we see these people are wrong, and then we go to the other extreme, and we're just as wrong. We're just wrong in a different way, right? We're still not humanizing people. We're still phenomenalizing people, right? We're not seeing them, just people. So that's my church. I'm here every Sunday, right? It may not be where you expect to find me, but this is everywhere we go today is where I live when I'm not on the WashU campus, right? These are not areas I feel some abstract sympathy for or issue. This is the areas I love the most. This is where I live the most. Right? So having said that, it's very complex because yes, this is my church. I am a member here. Right? Reverend Davis actually turned 100 on Easter. Right? Having said that, it's also, the larger story is that I am the second white person in 60 years to join that church. Right? So again, things are very complicated, right? On both sides. So let's get back on the bus.
God, thank you for giving me a long life. Amen. God, thank you for saving my children. Amen. God, thank you for bringing them out. Amen. God, thank you for keeping me. So you begin to speak faith over your life every day. Speak the word of God. Amen. And when you speak the word of God, guess what? The devil got to go. Amen. How many believe that on today? How many got a hallelujah on today? Amen. Hallelujah. Anyhow, never ever let the devil get you down. Amen. Hold your head up high and say, hallelujah. Anyhow, devil. Amen.
I want
Do you
them
want to leave them in complexity? Do you want
Yes,
them
they have to work their way through reality.
Okay.
They have to work their way through reality. I'm not going to tell them what to think, and I'm not going to only present parts of it that line up with each other,
No,
right?
my question is
They have to
what
figure it
end
out.
do you want them
They have to get used to dealing with complexity and reality.
okay, and asking
Yeah.
lots of different kinds of questions from
listening
different
to
perspectives?
contrasting voices and weighing it out. And yeah.
It was so interesting. It was real hard, but if you looked around and just saw all of your friends just working their butt off, you turn around and start, you get into it too, but it was so weird. It's like, I don't think any of us had ever worked that hard and put that much time and effort into something. And you could turn around and see Bob standing there, and this is the one that was teaching us all of this. I think the art brought a lot of us together. I don't know, the relationships between us got a lot better. And I would say art did that. It would have never happened without art.
There's the zip code is a good predictor in St. Louis, certainly, and other places of your life expectancy, right? And as well as other things. You start looking at, we'll be up in Kinloch later on. And if you compare the life expectancy in Kinloch to the life expectancy out in Wildwood, there's almost a 30-year difference. Right? And you know who lives where. Right? 30 years. That's almost, in this weird world we live in now, to be expected. Right? There's another stat that I find even more staggering, that in the Ville area, where we'll be, it's right over there, the life expectancy a couple of years ago, and it kind of shifts a little bit over, year by year, but it's always around the same phenomenon. Life expectancy in the Ville was 65.7 years. 65.7 years. Now, we again expect that to be lower than other places in the city because we get that injustice, right? It's more staggering when you realize that the life expectancy in Bangladesh is 68 years. 68 years versus 65.7. And in the areas that are urbanizing in Bangladesh, it's almost 70. So when we talk about third world health conditions, that's not some poetic metaphor. That's a statistical reality. Right? That's nothing we should accept much longer. Right? What's interesting is a couple months ago, the Board of Aldermen blighted the area up there, which is the first step you do to eminent domain. And just a couple of weeks ago, they actually granted eminent domain rights as well. So all these people have been coming, they come to the church, they're talking to all the people about, buying out. But we still don't know if the geospatial will pick here, right? But they're doing all this in advance anyway. So right now, we're all just kind of up in the air as what's going to happen. What happens in the neighborhoods, and you'll see it in another one, is after a while, the neighborhood just feels under the gun. You don't know what's going to happen. So should I invest? You know, should I fix up my home? Should I move? What should I do? And the neighborhood goes into a death spiral, right? Even greater than the one it's already in because of all these other things we've been seeing. So these neighborhoods that we're seeing have been pummeled historically over and over and over. And then you look at the overlays, right? And it starts to explain because you go, oh my God, the area where the HOLC redlined was also the area where the Team 4 plan came in. We'll talk about that. It's also the area where the schools are closing, where healthcare is terrible, where the life expectancy is low, where the homicide rate is high, food deserts, right? It makes an awful kind of sense after a while. Well, of course it's all happening there, right? Of course it's all happening there and not somewhere else, not where I grew up. Right? So again, I think as you understand this, it not only contextualizes our own lives, but it contextualizes the lives of the other people that we're not hearing from, right? And we're not listening to. It's amazing to me, John and I were talking about this, how many of us know very little, but we've got very strong opinions about other people. You know, we talk when we should be listening. And when those people try to explain it to us, we say, oh, you're biased. Let's go. There's a lot of reasons. I just said, you know, the way you're doing things doesn't make any sense. And so they reconfigured it, and they love this now. Also then through Bi-State, I started doing art buses, but once again, the bus was almost the afterthought. What I really discovered I loved was working with the kids and the people and the relationships that developed. The art was just a way to put your toe in the door. It wasn't the point. The people were the point. This is Jermaine. He was the boy I was closest to. He died 2 years after I started the program, and that was a moment for me. Two things happened in the wake of that. One of the other boys, Javon, asked to move in with me because he was lost without Jermaine. And one of the moms, I was just wandering around the projects one time, and Belinda came over and basically suggested I move into the project because I was lost. And I did. I'm probably the only WashU professor that's moved into the projects.
I remember the day I asked her, could I move out to Bob's house? She was sitting on the couch reading a newspaper. Ma, would it be okay if I got some clothes and moved out to Bob's house? You would think a mother would at least put the newspaper down because that's a pretty big subject, I would think. She never looked up once. She's like, well, get your shit and get the fuck out then. Never looked up one time. I got to see how black folks treated black folks, you know, and then moving out to South County, I got to see how white folks treated black folks, you know. I could come outside and go to the store and down at Peabody and get shot and killed anytime, you know. Didn't have to be my problem or nothing. And I knew how dangerous that was, but living it for so long, I felt safer out in South County with a bunch of white people calling me niggas all day, yelling out the window. Because I knew they would keep going. I knew they wouldn't pull out a gun and shoot me.
One day, a few years ago, John Vaughn and I were cleaning up the studio after the children had left, and it was a day when we'd done some other things, and then we asked them, it's just, you know, here's some crayons, just draw whatever you want, you know, just, we'll kill a few hours, you know, kill a few minutes till your family comes home and we walk you home. And we didn't see this drawing until after the kids had left, and we're cleaning up the drawings. And we found a lot of little hearts and butterflies and flowers, and I love Javon, and I love City Faces, and all that cute stuff. And all of a sudden, we found this one. It's pretty much American history in a child's drawing. And what it says is this. It was by Michelle. She was about 9, 10, 11 years old at the time. And it's actually a self-portrait, but it's split in half. And on the left side, she's purple. She's not her natural color. She's purple and she's crying. And what's behind it says, "This is life for us now." And it's nighttime. There's two guns firing at each other. You can barely even see the hands. You see the guns, not the hands. As they're firing, bleeding bodies coming out of it, right, lying there on the ground. This is life for us now. And on the right side, she has written, "This is what we want, but don't know how to make it that way." And the sun is shining. She's her natural color. Kids are playing jump rope and hopscotch and not getting shot. And her heart is over here as well. And her heart even is split in half. And there's a big hole in the middle of it. And what she wrote on her heart is, "Pain is what she fills." I think she meant to write feels, but she wrote fills. The pain fills her heart. Because these kids, they're waiting for this dream to be fulfilled that we keep talking about. Right? That, you know, they've got a dream. They would like to eat every day. They would like to play jump rope and not get shot. And then, of course, the thing that I think is probably the centerpiece of my life now, although I never saw it coming. 1994, I wandered down into the projects with the idea I might teach some art to some kids. And you very, very quickly discovered what else they need. And 2 years later, the community itself asked me to move in. And now we've got, and Javon, who was one of the kids in it the first year, I met Javon when he was about 11 or 12. He's now 34, and he's my son. He moved in with me, and then some years later asked if I'd adopt him, and I'd never been asked a more beautiful thing in my life.
It was a court building that was just for adoptions. We went there for my birthday, and everybody that didn't want it to happen could not stop it from happening on that day, and it was just me and him, So we did it ourselves, and it felt so good. The answer was no to everything we were trying to do, because he wasn't my legal guardian, and also people looked at us so strange because I'm black and he was white. Nobody looked at it like, well, I can tell he's trying to help him. No. I don't know why helping him never came up, but that's what Bob was doing. If you think like these are things that a father should do for their child, this was somebody who was just trying to help me. It showed me that he was still gonna be who he was, no matter who the person was he was dealing with.
How do you care about things that don't affect you personally? Or you think they don't affect you personally? Where's that empathy come from? Because life is too short to experience everything yourself. So at some point, you've got to take people's word. You've got to do it vicariously. And grow up and care about somebody besides yourself. At one point, not wanting to live, and actually getting so close. And then we found each other. And now, look what we've created together.
City of Faces didn't cause the problem. City of Faces gave me somewhere to go, gave me somewhere to grow and actually see what I could do, Kept me from getting shot, got me out of a gang. I stopped selling drugs because of it, I hated everything that I was forced to do, and what City Faces has done for me is I get to flip everything now. I get to go help kids. I get to, and some of the kids that are in my program, parents or my friends that are in jail that are never coming home again. I get calls from them saying, "Thank you, I saw my kid in the newspaper," or, "Thanks for helping my kid get a mentor." I get to do everything that it's just a total opposite, and I love it. I wouldn't change none of it, nothing for the world. Now I want the kids and people to know that.
But I look at the kids, when I think back on what I've seen happen to my children that I taught starting back in '94, when I think of how many of them are not with us anymore. Because they grew up where you guys grew up for most part with a tailwind, just kind of pushing you along, right? And all you had to do is not screw it up. My kids got a headwind. Everything they try to do. Javon just a couple weeks ago actually moved across the river to there might be kind of a nice, quiet little community. And in 2 weeks, he was pulled over by the police 4 times. Oh, we don't racially profile, right? We're also post-racial. They never tell him why they pulled him over. They never give him a ticket. But he's back in St. Louis. Now he's living back downtown where he's safe, right? But I look at him with his kids, and I wonder when I look at this picture in 20 years, how many of these children will have made it? In the meantime, the WashU kids are all over the Peabodys. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I don't know another project in the United States that is so fused with university students. They're down there all the time, mentoring the kids, becoming part of their families. We do cooking and nutrition and homework and tutoring, boys clubs, girls clubs, haircuts, keep the kids safe. And for me, the payoff has been really astonishing because I've got a family, literally, that I never would have had. Javon's become a national hero. He's been on CBS News with Katie Couric, been written up in Christian Science Monitor. He's living a life now that he says, it wasn't like I heard about this life and thought I'll never achieve it. He didn't even know this life existed.
I hope you know I love him more than anything, and I just want to make sure that he's proud of me. That's my main focus right now, in life, I think, because I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be here.
This is when we got interviewed for Christian Science Monitor, and I now have a grandson as well, who came to Relay from Life, which was kind of one of those moments, but it all kind of came full circle for me, right? I mean, when I marched, for cancer research every year around the track, this life that I never thought I would have has now led to all this. And now I've got a grandson I never thought I would have, congratulating me on a life I never thought I would have had in many, 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 many ways. So, it can happen to you too. Thank you. Art can do amazing things when you don't just think about art.